Hey, this is Synergy Loves Company, where we explore how Disney connects to everything because we all connect with Disney in our own special ways. I'm Eric, and today we're going to explore those ways that we connect to Disney, our Disney fandom. Fandoms are communities, but they can also be very personal experiences as well. And there are so many different ways that someone could get into Disney. And maybe you could list a few as to how you became a Disney fan. Disney parks, Disney Channel, classic animation, Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel. The list goes on and on. And in honor of this back to school time of year, I thought it would be a good idea for us to take some time and learn a little something about our Disney fandom, how we connect with Disney. If only there was someone who taught a class about being a fan of Disney, or someone who wrote a book about being a fan of Disney, or maybe even someone who podcasts about being a fan of Disney. Oh, wait, that's right. There is someone who does all three of those things. So, keeping me company today is Dr. Cody Havard, the creator of Being a Fan of Disney, the class, the book, and the podcast. Cody, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. It's nice to be here. That was a really, really fun introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, well, no, I'm excited that you're here to talk about all the work you do with all of those things, really. So, you do study fandom and teach a university level class called Being a Fan of Disney, but you're also a Disney fan yourself. So you're kind of on the inside of it. So, what is your Disney fandom like? How would you describe your fandom?
So my fandom, I think, like most kids growing up, I was born in the '80s. I was old enough to experience the end of like the Black Cauldron. I remember getting a Fergie plush toy. And then I experienced like the early Renaissance movies. Um, so I remember trying to sing like Ariel. I remember trying to do the hair flip and like swimming pools when we are at hotels and everything. My sister had much better luck with that than I did. I had short hair. Um, but so I think growing up at that time, you were inundated with Disney. Not like it is today, however. Um, I mean, like then as a kid, you saw a lot of Disney things. Like we saw the movies. I remember trying to draw the genie while we're waiting on the family car to be worked on. Trying to write in the Disney font, and so it was just kind of all around you as a kid. We went to the parks two or three times. I think the first time I went was '88. And then the next year we went back with my extended family. So it was my mom, my grandmother, and then all the cousins. So there were a total of six of us. There were three families that went, and we went to Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Hollywood Studios or MGM Studios had just opened. Universal Studios had just opened, so we went to those four parks, and we stayed at the Polynesian Resort. And that's the only time I've stayed at the Polynesian Resort. We got to do like the little. We thought it was really cool because we got to drive the boats by ourselves in the lagoon. That was really fun for us. Um, and then as you get older, I got into high school. I was playing sports at a lot, and I just didn't really have a lot of time to do things. I probably at some point thought I was a little too cool for Disney, or at least too cool to admit to other people that I liked Disney. However, 1995 was when Toy Story came out. And so it was this new kind of form of entertainment. And I remember watching that movie, and it reminds me of what people say about Star Wars. That the very first time I saw those clouds on the wall, I thought this is completely different. This has changed entertainment. There were very few movies where I felt like that. That Interestingly enough, Titanic was one that I was like, oh, this changes a lot of things. And then Jurassic Park. Um, and so like I started to appreciate those types of movies then. And then in college, I just didn't have money or time to do anything. Um, I recently got back into my fandom pretty hard, probably in 2011 or 12, when that was the first time I went back to the parks in a really long time. I went with my wife; we were dating at the time, and then since then we've had our two boys have now. I think my oldest son has gone to Walt Disney World 3 times, my youngest 2 times, and then this last year we got to go to Disneyland, and so uh, it was a lot of fun. And I'll stop talking right now so we can. I've been talking long enough, but I could talk about like the class and everything in just a little bit.
Of course. And that's, yeah, no, I feel like there's a lot of similarities in your story of your Disney fandom and mine. They're not the same, of course, but I feel like that idea of kind of it being everywhere as a kid, being a kid of the 90s, I could totally agree with that. And then I kind of had that experience of rediscovering Disney with bringing my family to the parks too. And so, like, I think that some of us do have a very similar story, but like you just talked about with like the class coming up, um, like as far as you've done a lot of research on Disney and you interview a lot of Disney fans for the class, for the podcast that's a companion to the class. And so in studying Disney fandom, have you found any like commonalities or trends that kind of run across Disney fans? Is there like a certain kind of person who's like more likely to be a Disney fan?
So, real quick, one thing I do want to mention, looking at your shirt, Figment is, as we
Yes.
talked about when you interviewed for being a fan of Disney the podcast. He's my favorite Parks character, possibly my favorite Disney character,
I'm not going to lie. I
and
chose the shirt because of that.
thank you. What What's so interesting is when I went that first time, I absolutely fell in love with Figment and the Imagination Pavilion. I interacted with Figment and Dreamfinder, like the walk around character Dreamfinder. That's no longer there now, and that was one area where I could not understand why this little purple dragon was not more places. I mean, we bought like the little the little figurines while we were there. I have like ceramic figurines from when I was at like that copyright 1982. So like I would have gotten those on my first or second trip. Like, and I know like he wasn't other places, which was so interesting to me. He did some like, educational videos and everything that you can find on YouTube. Um, but now like he's made such a comeback now that, he's in the comics. He's kind of the unofficial mascot of Epcot. There's rumors that they're making a movie about him. And so it wasn't until I was older that I realized Figment was only an East Coast character. He's one of the few Disney characters that was created solely for the parks and hasn't really, he hasn't been in many things other than that. He made an appearance at Inside Out 2, in a picture frame, or in a painting. But like that was really, really interesting to me. And so getting into the types of fans or types of people that make Disney fans, there's really not like I haven't found like a particular type of person that becomes a fan of Disney. What's really interesting is when I got my start researching fan behavior in sport, and particularly rivalry and competition in sport. And so because of that, like we'll look at things like socialization into sport, who introduces you to sport. We and it's typically the family or close loved ones that's the same thing with Disney. And so what's really, really interesting is across kind of the swath of like consumerism, if we want to call it that, our families introduce us to so many things. However, I think Disney, much like sport, is there's a very, very strong connection with that. That if you are introduced to who your favorite sport team is early in life, it takes a lot to change that as you grow older. It's the same thing with Disney. If you grew up with people who liked Disney, now, yes, you definitely can kind of have overload, if you will, and choose not to, like you don't want to be a fan of Disney as you grow older because your family was such a big fan. Um, but the the stories I've heard of that happening pale in comparison to the number of people who say, I grew up in a Disney family, or I was a Disney kid, or much like you and I, when we grew up, it was just everywhere. Like you didn't know, sometimes you didn't even know that you were seeing something Disney related. And you were, and now it's even more so with just the amount of acquisitions they've made. The sheer size of the company is enormous. It's the largest entertainment company. So they own so much. What's really interesting is another area that I've really looked into a lot is streaming and streaming entertainment. And when you look at Disney's ability to compete with like an Amazon and an Apple, the giant tech companies, I don't know how much Disney is worth today, but it's usually around 290, somewhere around there. At one point, it was over 350 billion dollars, which is a lot, is very, very huge. But like Apple is like 3 trillion, and Amazon is almost 2 trillion. Like all of these entertainment companies are very, very small compared to these tech companies. And so that's a really interesting area. That's a little bit of probably a little bit of a detour,
That's
but
fine. No, yeah.
I got going. Sorry.
No, but that's very interesting, that like family connection that you kind of pull out there, and it is a company. So it's like one of those things that we can look at it in like that terms of the family, like the family introduces us to it, or close people, or it's all around us, but at the end of the day, it's a company like Apple, like Amazon, like those giant companies around it. So that no, it is an interesting. It kind of carved out its own little category in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think we talked about this when you did my show.
Yeah,
What other, if you're a sports fan, here's one thing that I think you're unique about sports and Disney fans also. If you're a sports fan, we talked about if your team's not doing well, you're calling for the head coach to be fired or the general manager to be fired. You know who those people are. In Disney, people know who the CEO is. If you say the name Josh Tomorrow, most people know who that is if they are a Disney fan. Do the majority of people who drink Coca-Cola products know who the Disney or the Coke CEO is? Like do people know who the Samsung CEO is? I think a lot of people know Tim Cook with Apple, but also I think there's if you're a Disney fan, there's such a strong tie between Apple and Disney, also dating back to when they made the Pixar purchase and the kind of the turmoil that Disney and Pixar were in the early 2000s before Bob Iger took over. So yeah, I mean, it is a company, and at the end of the day, they are, I've heard it said many times, they're not in it to make money; they're in it to make a lot of money. And so, we all participate in like the mass consumerism that is the Walt Disney Company, and we do it willingly.
Oh,
because
for sure.
because of the attachment we have to it, and that a lot of that has to do with family.
Oh yeah. You could notice my mass consumerism wall I have back here of
Yeah.
Disney items. It's yeah, we do buy it. Um so that makes me start thinking about, the Disney fans, the people who decide, the students who decide to take your class. So like who I guess my next question is, who decides to take a class about being a fan of Disney? I know I would, because I am a fan of Disney, but are most of your students Disney fans to begin with?
So it's offered through our honors college. And what our honors college does is they have 1 hour seminars that they call freshman seminars. They like people to take them in their first year, but you don't have to. If you are an honor student at the University of Memphis, you have to take it, take an honors forum at least once before you graduate. Um, so in the class, I usually will have a lot of freshmen with some, upperclassmen sprinkled in there. The class ranges from 15 to sometimes one semester I had 21. Um, and what's really, really interesting is I started the class because somebody told me, hey, you should start a class on what it is to be a fan of Disney because I talked about it so much. And I think they did that because they're like, I can't take more time out of my day to talk to you about this. Like you need some outlet to talk about this. Um, and so when I started the class, the first time I walked in, and every first day I walk into the semester, I will ask how many people are fans of Disney, and it's usually more than half. Um, but I will ask people, what are some of the reasons you took this class? And some people are, I grew up a Disney fan, or I'm a fan of Marvel, I'm a fan of Star Wars. I want to, I wanted in this class. Some other people are like, well, it was between this class and another one that would fit my schedule. This one seemed more interesting to take. When I ask about parks, we live in, like, I teach at the University of Memphis. We are about a 12-hour drive from Orlando. um, we would be like a 2-day drive from Anaheim. So you would have to fly to Anaheim if you're going to Disneyland. When I ask about parks, who all has been, it's usually less than 50%. It might be like 5 or 6 people in the class have been to a park. One semester I did have like 11 people who had been to parks, and I had multiple people who had been to parks on both coasts. Some actually had been to some of the international parks, but usually it's 5 or 6 people. And so what's really, really interesting is people will take the class because they have this one connection to Disney, or two connections to Disney, or like I said, because it sounded more interesting than another class. Um, but then throughout the semester, like, they're wanting to learn more about it. People come in and they're not really sure what the class is going to be about. Are we just going to watch park videos? Are we going to watch like uh, movie, uh, like theatrical movie trailers and things like that? Sometimes we'll take a special trip and go to uh, see whatever latest Disney movie is coming out. This semester, I'm not sure if we'll be able to do that. We're not going to go see Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't think I don't I don't think that would be a good move. Um, but yeah, people take the class and they want to learn more about it, which is really, really fun and really, really cool for me.
It is. So you kind of find that too, that the students have kind of different access points to Disney. Um, it's interesting, especially because I feel like in the Disney, um, I don't even know what to call it, the Disney social media landscape, I guess we'll call it. I used to be heavy on the Diz Twitter, but it seems to be all over the place now. So much attention is put on the parks. It's kind of interesting to hear that sometimes you have only a small handful of the class who's actually visited the parks.
One thing I would absolutely love to develop the class enough where we took a trip to Walt Disney World. because I am a firm believer that people should be able to go at least once in their life. Um, and it's undeniable. It's getting more and more expensive. It's getting more and more difficult to go. Um, so it would be really, really cool for me to be able to kind of share that with everybody that's in the class, to say like, here, here's what we've been talking about. Here's what it is. That's the same reason I would love to see a dark ride built in Disney Springs and in downtown Disney. Because if people can't afford to go to the parks, they can at least experience, they can go to those places and experience, this is what it is. And that definitely would cause some people to purchase tickets to the parks. But for those people who just absolutely couldn't afford it, at least they get to have that experience without, paying the price of admission to get into the theme parks.
Yeah, the idea of a ride in Disney Spring, I know I'm all for it. 100%, or downtown Disney, or traveling. It almost reminds me of what they could very easily do something like what they were talking about with that play pavilion that I don't
Mhm.
think is getting much traction, and have that like black box kind of promotional
Yeah.
ride kind of idea. So that, yeah, no, I'm 100% for that,
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
people more access to Disney attractions. Um, but let's talk about access to your class, because
Okay.
I want to know a little bit more about what is the being a fan of Disney class like. If I were to come in, maybe not the first day, because maybe there's getting to know us, but like in the middle of the semester, I come into your class. What might be happening in a class called being a fan of Disney?
So as I said, like, kind of started the class so I could have an outlet to talk about all this stuff. And so the first semester that I taught it, spring 2018, I walked in the class and I said, here's my plan. I hadn't I emailed the um, director of the honors program, like, and in 3 weeks I'm teaching the class. Like, they're just like, yeah, yeah, go ahead, let's do it. Because they're 1 hour classes. They're supposed to be fun. They're set up so that people can meet people outside of their majors and see your professors in a different light, that type of thing. So I was given a whole lot of freedom for what I wanted to do. And I remember I did not create a syllabus with a schedule on it. I had a syllabus with, like, here are some social media handles to follow. Here are some videos. I walked into class that first day and I explained, I don't have a syllabus with this, or I don't have a schedule, because here's what I'm thinking I want to do. And I literally thought, I want to let's watch park videos, because that's what I enjoy doing. But I asked the students, what are some things that you want to know? And I mean, the floodgates just opened. They wanted to know the history of the company. They wanted to know the history of animation, about Pixar, how Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, how all of that was like, how it's involved in Disney now. So the acquisitions. I did have one person say they wanted to know like the history of opening a theme park. And I'm like, well, or how to open a theme park. I'm like, that's not this class, but and so now it's sort of a survey course. We'll start the semester. We'll kind of talk about people's connections to Disney. I do, I often do show like the huge graphic of how much Disney owns so everybody could see. As we talked about before, I will challenge students to go a day without consuming Disney, and usually that lasts about 4 or 5 minutes, if that. Um, the and then we will go through and we'll talk about current events that are happening with Disney. We will talk about, I talk a lot about Disney Plus and kind of streaming strategy. We spend about 6 weeks on the parks. And then because students like doing it, we'll also hold like votes, like discussions and votes, kind of like bracket style. What's what's the best MCU project, or what's your favorite MCU project? Who's your favorite or best MCU character? Uh, we do that for Pixar movie, Walt Disney World attractions, and then Disney movies at the end. And so I go into each semester with, here's the things that I think will be interesting to cover. Like, I love talking about Epcot, for example, and the original plans for Epcot, and then what it kind of evolved into. But it also does change based on what's happening in the real world. So, for example, spring 2021, with all the uh, kind of back and forth struggle between the Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney World of Florida and the Florida legislature, that was like, we spent some time talking about that, just kind of from different perspectives, like what employees were thinking, and things that I was reading about what employees were thinking, not getting into like the political side of everything. Fall 2022 was a big semester for change, because we're watching, I believe, the first live broadcast on Disney Plus. If you remember, it was Elton John live at
Yeah.
Dodger Stadium. And
Yeah.
that was overshadowed by the news that uh, Bob, who just left a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, is now back as CEO. Like, that was the change from Chapek back to Iger. And so it kind of depends on what the students want to talk about, and what's going on within like Disney culture and society at that time.
So then the next question I have, because that sounds perfect for big Disney nerds like myself. So can someone who's not enrolled at the University of Memphis, and not in your class, can we follow along somehow with your class and participate in any ways? Is there any ways that we could kind of get some of the experience of your class?
So that's one thing that w- I we have we've looked at many different ways of how to do that within the university. And I'm in the process of actually writing up a proposal to do it sort of as a community class, which would count for people's professional development. If they like, if you have a job that you need professional development credit, and you could use this for professional development. As far as, until that happens, and that would actually be like somebody registers for it, and
Yeah.
it's a 2 or 3 weekend course, whatever. We have to get into the specifics of that. But until then, people can follow along. What I like doing at the beginning of each semester, I will post the schedule for for people who want to follow along. And the schedule is very, very in depth. I have to tell the students in the class, look, don't worry, don't like flip out. Yes, this is a 1 hour class. Like, this is a passion project, so that's why this schedule looks as big as it does. Uh, but people can follow along. They can listen to the podcast. I mean, the podcast was started because during the pandemic, when I started doing more and more one-on-one interviews, then fall 2020, I asked students how they liked it, and they said they liked it, but sometimes they were all YouTube videos. They said they liked it, but sometimes they just listened to it. So we started a podcast. One thing I wanted to do with being a fan of Disney, the book, is to give people another way to follow along with the class. So, like, within that, if people read the book, um, everybody loves hidden Mickeys and trying to find hidden Mickeys
Yeah.
everywhere. You find them in the parks, you find them in movies, but we're so into it now that we'll be driving around town or walking somewhere, and all of a sudden, like, one of my boys will be like, "Oh, look, there's a hidden Mickey," and it's just this awesome feeling. So
Yeah.
I wanted to do something like that in the book as well, because we do that in class. So I created hidden Baffets. BAFOD. So being a fan of Disney. And so basically, a hidden Baffin is, um, if you get the book, you'll see it. It's a little logo with a castle on it. It's neither Cinderella Castle nor Sleeping Beauty Castle, but it has a Mickey and silhouette inside it, and then on the top of it, kind of looping over it, it says Baffin. And I put one of those in each chapter, and it'll be just, sometimes it's at the end of a sentence, sometimes it's right in the middle of a sentence. And on my website, sharedperspectives.org, people can go and they can report where they saw these hidden Baffins. And people could even, like, you can get like a digital badge that says you're a hidden Baffin investigator. People could take quizzes from the book. There are on sharedperspectives.org, there's 3 quizzes. It's a 15 chapter book because the class is 15 weeks. And so it kind of works out nicely where each week we can go over a different chapter. And so people could take a chapter, or quiz 1 is chapters 1 through 5, and then 6 through 10 is quiz 2, and then 11 through 15 is quiz 3. So those are ways that people can do it. And then one thing that we do in the class, we have 2 case studies. One over what Marvel character do you think best represents you? Because a lot of the students are fans of Marvel. So we did that. That's off of a faculty essay I wrote for the Journal of Undergraduate Studies. We used to have one that was what attraction at Walt Disney World or Disneyland best represents you. That was replaced by the Marvel assignment. It's actually, now I'm going to start giving people the choice if they want to do one or the other. And then at the end, there is kind of a synthesis paper of basically what is Disney's impact on society. And for the students, they need to use 7 examples from the interviews, because each week they have 6 or 7 choices of all of these interviews that I've done with people like you, to talk about fandom. And so in this paper, they kind of summarize it, and they say, here's what it means to fans, here's what it means to greater society, and then here's what it means to me. Like, here's how my fandom of Disney has changed. And it's really, really cool to read those, because at the end, you ultimately do have some students that say, I wasn't really a fan. Now I appreciate it much more because of this. Or I was a fan of the parks. Now I know everything that the company does. People can follow along in the book with that as well. I actually have 3 chapters that I give my response to those questions. So I call it putting myself through the paces. And so people can do that. People can, they can always message me, or post it on. There is a public fan group called Being a Fan of Disney on Facebook. People can post things there that they want to do if they write about those stories and those case studies and everything. So there are various ways that people could follow along. And one easiest way is to visit sharedperspectives.org and listen to the podcast, or if you prefer watching video of talking heads, essentially, watch you can watch the YouTube channel also.
I'm going to guess that if they like video of watching talking heads, they probably made it this far in the YouTube version of this episode. So yes, definitely go over and look at those. No, and I also think it's really cool that because I was on your show, that I may possibly one day be cited in someone's paper.
Yes. Yeah.
That is pretty cool. That just blew my mind.
And so here what's so cool when I read the societal impact of Disney, it gets very emotional, because you can tell, there are always going to be some people that it's just, oh, this is due at 11:59, 11:55. I'm sitting down and I'm just writing anything I can. But there are people who go really, really in depth. The information people will pull from the interviews, a lot of times is very unique and are things that I totally miss. Like we do interviews like this all the time. And so I will sometimes a student will turn in something. I'll be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's a great perspective on what this person said that I didn't think about before.
Yeah, that is really neat when they could kind of pull it out like that and
Yeah.
find something in there. And yeah, no, and so your class does seem like it's a very dynamic thing and kind of can change with the interests of the class and the current events happening and all those kind of things happening in the world. And of course, Disney's very dynamic, and the study of Disney fandom is dynamic and always changing. And you have actually been doing some research into fandom, with Disney, with sports teams, with other sorts of fandoms, and it's something called comparison studies that kind of combines how all those fandoms kind of interact with each other in ways. And so, could you tell us a little bit about what is comparison studies?
Yeah. So like I said, when I started researching, um, this is my 14th year at the University of Memphis. I've been researching group behavior, competition, rivalry for that means probably 16 years or so. Um, and at first it was basically what does rivalry do to people? And what are the promotional aspects, the marketing aspects or implications from rivalry? We quickly realized, okay, some of the negativity that occurs between rival groups, that's caused by the promotions that they see. So, for instance, we did a series of studies. I did some, somebody else did some that showed people were asked if you could remain anonymous, there's no way you would get in trouble. How likely would you be to consider like tripping a fan, player, or coach of the rival team, breaking the leg of a coach, fan, or player of the rival team, physically hurting, or in some cases, in some of these studies, and there's been 6 or 7 of them, how likely would somebody be to consider murdering a player, fan, or
Right.
coach of the rival team? Consistently, when I was writing my first textbook on what rivalry is and how it can impact sport organizations and managers, I went and I looked at all of this data and I said, I found consistently, if we're talking about that most heinous act of aggression, like again, nobody can, nobody knows it. You wouldn't get in trouble for thinking this. How likely would you be to consider seriously hurting someone or consider murdering someone from the rival group? Consistently 1 to 2% of all the samples scored a 7, which is definitely, they definitely would consider that, which is very, very scary. And you think, okay, hopefully people are just kind of showboating a little bit and they're just saying this and they're being, like kind of, as people say, like keyboard warriors, that type of thing. But some of this data was collected online. Some of it was collected on paper and pencil in classrooms. Some of it was collected like at sporting events. So it's over all these different ways. And in every study, it was 1 to 2% of that population that was studied said they definitely would consider this most heinous act of aggression. So I started thinking about it. I said, okay, let's take the conservative figure of 1%. That doesn't sound that bad. That means 98, 99% of people would not do that. That's good. Like, that's good. But if there's 1% of people who definitely would consider things like that, even if they are just kind of trying to like be grandiose about it, we've seen examples of things like that happening. We've seen examples of people who get into fights. We've seen examples of people who have been killed because of rivalry. Like we've seen a lot of these horrible, horrible acts. And so I started thinking, okay, let's take that 1% because it's easy to calculate. Out of 100 people, that means there's one person in a crowd. Out of 1,000, that means there's 10. After, extrapolate it up to some of our biggest stadiums seat over 100,000 people. That means if what we have found is like is accurate. And it seems like it is because we found it 6 or 7 times. And for people who don't know, if you replicate something that many times, that's pretty accurate. That's very, very accurate. That would mean 1,000 people or more in that stadium, in that environment, would have like kind of been conditioned to definitely consider these heinous acts of aggression. So what can we do to stop things like that? Well, we did another study where we looked at the promotional titles we used, and we found that when somebody was exposed to the word rivalry to promote a rivalry versus exposed to the word hate, the people who were exposed to the word hate didn't necessarily actually report like stronger feelings of rivalry. They just reported more negative behavior toward the outgroup. So you're just elevating that level of negativity and that derogation between these two outgroups. And so after a while, I said, okay, we know all of this in sport. What about outside of sport? So that's where the comparison studies come in, where we started looking at how do sport fans feel about their rival groups versus we started with Disney parks fans. Fans of Disney parks, how do they feel about the Disney parks versus the Universal parks? And can we compare those? And so we used scales that I had developed. One, the rivalry perception scale, which is 4 subscales. We don't need to get into the methodology of that, but we also use something called the glory out of reflective failure scale, which basically says if your out group is unsuccessful in some way and you have nothing to do with it, are you going to celebrate that? How likely are you to celebrate that? And so we started doing those comparisons. And that first one, we saw, okay, fans of sport are much more negative toward their outgroup than Disney fans are toward Universal. That makes sense. But also, what was really, really cool is people who reported being a fan of both sport and Disney were less negative toward their rival group than somebody who was just a fan of sport or just a fan of Disney. And so that was really, really cool. And that's something called the common in group. That if you are a member of more groups, the more groups you're a member of, the less kind of negative repercussions you have if your in group fails in some way. Like if you're a member of only one group and that group experiences some type of perceived failure, you take it really, really hard. However, like I'm a fan of the Texas Longhorns. That's where I went to school, University of Texas. So if they're successful, great. If they're not successful, I can still go and watch park videos or turn on a Disney movie and feel good, so I don't experience that kind of perceived failure this the way someone else might that's just a fan of like the Longhorns or fill in another sports team. So we started there and then we just kept going. And at this point, we've done 12 different settings. So we've had 11 different studies on this because every study had sport compared to Disney parks, compared to theme park fandom, compared to streaming and cell phone usage, athletic footwear. We've done things like politics and religion. We did gaming consoles. And then when we got finished with gaming consoles like Xbox versus PlayStation, someone said, hey, if you really want to understand the gaming population, do PC, somebody uses a computer to game versus somebody who uses a console to game. And so at the end of all of that, what we were able to do, we were able to pull all of this data together and compare all of this data. And we created, I combined the scales that I had developed into a measure called the group behavior composite. And that basically is just over 16 items. At the end, each person gets one score that kind of shows their relative negativity toward that relevant outgroup. And so we had those scores for sport, for politics, for religion, gaming, Disney parks, theme parks, all of these different things. And we were able to find which groups elicited the most negativity, which group settings, elicited the most negativity toward their outgroups. And there's some really, really interesting findings that were pretty surprising. We have studied religion, politics, online gaming, which would be people who use PC versus people who use console. I said sport, athletic footwear, mobile phones, streaming services, general theme park fandom, gaming console like the PlayStation versus Xbox, Disney parks fans, and then we had science fiction, Star Wars, Star Trek, comics, Marvel versus DC. Of those 12, could you tell me what do you think the top three or the three settings that would influence the most negativity would be?
So out of those, I would guess that sports does get pretty intense. And
Okay.
then you do have a couple of things that we've always been told you don't discuss, which is politics and religion. So those are
Okay.
ones I would want to stay far away with, stay far away from. No.
So so actually the top three, religion is number one. And religion is far more uh like the mean scores on religion are far greater than other settings. But religion's one, politics is one. That's number three. Actually, the second most negative setting is online gaming. People who use a computer like a PC versus people who use a gaming console. And then sport is number four. So you had
Yeah.
three of the top four. And at first I thought, the gaming is very interesting, but then if anybody has ever gamed, and I really haven't, but I've talked to a lot of people who have, people will say really, really mean things to each other to try to get in each other's heads during competition. Um, and then within that specific like feelings, people who use a PC versus people who use a gaming console, what was explained to me is, well, if somebody's using a PC or a computer to game, they have spent a couple $1,000s for that. And so they look at somebody who's using a gaming console who hasn't spent as much money. They might look at them and say, like, hey, well, I'm a better gamer because I have this great setup and I have I have invested in this. Whereas somebody who uses like a PC, a gaming console, they haven't invested as much as this person. And these are all just perceptions of how these people view the different groups. But yeah, those are the top three. Religions first, then online gaming, and then politics. Um, and so we created the hierarchy of outgroup derogation. That is just it's a hierarchy that shows here are these 12 settings. And so to quickly go down them, if anybody's still listening to this, there basically religion is one, I said, then online gaming, politics is three, sport is four. Then we get down into what we call the medium or high negativity group. That's athletic footwear at number five, mobile phones at number six. Athletic footwear is closely tied to sport, so that kind of makes sense. Um, then below that, streaming is number seven. General theme park fandom is number eight. And then in the low negativity group, that's where we get to gaming console, PC versus Xbox users. And then Disney parks fandom is 10, science fiction 11, comics 12. Disney parks fandom is like on the scale the mean is a 4.01, which 4 is neutral. So that basically means like people don't have positive or negative views of the outgroup. When you get into science fiction and comics, those scores are actually in the threes, which mean those they actually have positive views of their outgroups. So like a Star Wars fan, they actually might have positive views of a Star Trek fan. A Marvel fan might have positive views of DC. A lot of that probably has to do with the fact that if you are a fan of Marvel, you've probably also read DC. If you're a fan of Star Wars, you've probably also watched Star Trek at some point. But also, those two groups, much like kind of Disney fandom or Disney adults, they sort of have this larger outgroup of people telling them, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be as invested in this as you are. So they kind of formed this larger in group, if you will. Like you might be a fan of Marvel or DC, and so you're in these smaller in groups, but you're a fan of comics overall, so you're in this in group together, and then like everybody telling you you should age out of it or shouldn't read comics anymore, like they're kind of treated as the out group, that type of thing.
And a lot of those that you talked about, they do kind of cross paths with Disney. You talk about comics and sci-fi, um, Disney parks, theme parks, all of those things. So, and you kind of even got into it at all, but maybe I'm looking for like a definitive what you think about this. But like, what do you think us Disney fans can learn from all this data about comparison studies and learn about our Disney fandom?
With the hierarchy of outgroup derogation, we also did a spectrum, the outgroup derogation spectrum, just so we could like visually show people here's where all of these groups fall on this spectrum from more positive to more negative. Um, and so like people can see that and they can say, okay, that's really interesting. Like religion's way over here in the very, very negative. And then you have to go a little bit of distance. You get to online gaming, you get to politics and sport. But look over at this side, here's comics and science fiction. So one thing that I looked at after that is how many of these group settings is Disney involved in? And out of the six, I'm sorry, out of the 12, there are actually six groups that Disney has some type of involvement with. They have been involved with sport. They've owned sport teams. They've worked with the Olympics. They own ESPN. They are involved in streaming because of Disney Plus. They are involved in theme parks. Obviously, they're involved in Disney parks. That's very specific to them. And then they're involved with science fiction because of Star Wars and comics because of Marvel. Um, with the exception of sport is in that high negativity group. But the rest of the five, they're in that medium to low negativity group or low negativity group. So you have streaming and theme parks are in that medium negativity group, but then you have Disney parks, comics or science fiction and comics, they're all in the low negativity group. And so what's really, really cool is there's something called the extended contact hypothesis, which basically says the more you interact with somebody who is not from your group, and if you find connections with that person and you continually interact with that person, maybe the more you start to understand that person. That doesn't mean you agree with them. And there's a really, really great book on political discourse by a person. His last name's Hibbing. Can't remember his first name. But basically, his whole thesis of the book is you want to understand where this comes from and where people come from, not so you can change their minds, but we have to live with each other, right? We're all in this society together. You need to know how to essentially coexist with people, if nothing else. And so, looking at especially those three settings that are in the low negativity group, Disney parks, science fiction, and comics, those three settings could potentially be a common interest for people that could kind of, that's the thing people could coalesce about around. So at the very beginning, you asked me, what is the specific, like, is there a specific person who's, more likely to be a Disney fan? And I said, there really isn't. And that's the awesome thing about it, is because Disney is one of those brands that cuts over a wide swath of our society, where it gets people from, different religions. It gets people from different political persuasions. It gets people from different, Yankees fans and Boston Red Sox fans love Disney. It gets people who game over PC or game over a console. It could be one of these areas where it's this connection for people. And the same thing with comics, the same thing with science fiction, Star Wars, and Marvel fandoms. But what's really, really cool about Disney is we also talked earlier about the parks. And some people are specifically fans of the parks. It's as though people have talked about how sport like resembles a religion, and people have talked about how Disney sort of resembles a religion. And not to, I don't want to be blasphemous for anybody, but like what they mean by that is some of the things that people experience in like a religious setting, they can also experience in these other settings. And the theme parks is like the gathering place for Disney fans, right? I mean, one reason you said you started your podcast was because people can't get to the Disney parks all the time.
Right.
So where's another place to gather? Like you have the Disney parks as like, that might be like the kind of tier one mecca of like places to gather for a Disney parks fan or a Disney fan. But then you also have all these online communities that we participate in. And you have these friendships that have been built, and yes, they've been built online. People may never meet each other, but they share this fandom of Disney. I've talked to so many people that have said, they've never met the people they converse with about Disney online, but they have become such an integral part of their life. They share life events with them, not just Disney related things. They're sharing life events with each other, which is absolutely beautiful when you think about it. And so that's like that's why I feel like Disney, through its subsidiaries, through its parks, uh, you don't really want to go with sport probably, but through all these other like subsidiaries in these other areas, could be this catalyst for being a connection between people, which is really, really cool. And if we have that connection, then maybe you have somebody who they don't agree on politics, or they don't agree on religion, or they don't agree on what sports team to follow. They don't agree if they like Nike or Adidas, whatever, but they know they like Disney. And so they can always talk about Disney. And that's very, very important. And the last thing I'll say is, because you think of the number of movies where, and typically people are talking about sport when they do it. I'm thinking of the movie City Slickers, where they're somebody asks one of the characters, why is sports so important to you? Like it's just grown men playing kids games, right? And the person said, when, yes, it's grown men playing kids games, but when they were a teenager and couldn't talk to their father about anything else, they could talk about sport. That is Disney for a lot of people also. They may not want to talk about other issues. And if you feel comfortable enough where then you can talk about issues that maybe you disagree on, great. If you never get to that point, you still have this connection, and you still kind of build this camaraderie with people in our society. So that's basically what all of that means after a 15-20 minute description.
That's okay, because it makes me feel something good about our Disney fandom. And we're in a place too where like us Disney adults, I'm gonna call myself a Disney adult. I don't know if you refer to yourself as one as well, but Disney adults were these super, nerdy Disney fans who are adults and have kind of it's stuck with us all our lives. Um, and sometimes we get a lot of contention online for being Disney adults, and people like to make fun of Disney adults. But is it really like, are the Disney adults like the super connectors? Is it our Disney fandom that is possibly the thing that can unite people? What do you think about that idea?
So what's so interesting to me about like Disney adults, this term Disney adults. First of all, like you asked me if I consider myself a Disney adult. I do, because like reading enough about it and talking to enough people about it, I realize, hey, that's me. Like well, I mean, when you break down what Disney adult means, it means you are an adult and you are a fan of Disney. Like that's what it is. And it's used like in this derogatory way for people, this negative way to describe people. You can define yourself and you can define what you want to be, but you also kind of look to other people to like help you define what you are. If other people look at you in a certain way and they think you're hardworking or whatever, well, then you are. Like, that's the way people view you. And if that's something that matches with how you see yourself, that's really, really good. If you see yourself as hardworking and other people see you as somebody who's not, well, then you kind of have that conflict there, and you need to figure out how to fix that, or for yourself, for happiness. So I think a lot of people use the term Disney adult in a negative way because they don't understand what it is. And I have heard Disney adults kind of make the statement like, well, people just call us Disney adults and try to do it in a mean way because that's because they're unhappy, because they've lost their imagination, or they've lost their ability to like have fun with Disney and things like that. I wouldn't say that because I don't know that person. I don't know somebody who is saying it in a negative way. What I think happens is they don't understand. And when you start talking to somebody about, let's say somebody says like, oh, Disney adults, that's so like, that's childish. Then you start asking somebody, well, what do you really believe in? What are you like? What makes you happy? Maybe it's reading books. Maybe it's going to concerts. Maybe it's going to Taylor Swift concerts. A lot of people did over the last
Oh yeah.
2 summers, right? Or a lot of people went to the movie theaters. A lot of people are streaming it on Disney Plus now. Um, you find, or maybe it is that person who they love sports and they have since their childhood. And and then you ask them, why do you love that? What do you get from that? And they get, a lot of times people will say things like, well, I feel fulfilled. Um, if something good happens to my team, then I feel like I can do things like on my own as well. So I have this like vicarious achievement through our team success. If I go to a concert and I see like Taylor Swift perform, then I feel like I can be more creative. I feel more inspired to do things, like, I mean, watch videos of a Taylor Swift concert and look at the number of people crying at a Taylor Swift concert. It's the same as watching when a team wins a championship. How many people at that in that arena or that stadium or in the parade, when they have their parade, are just cheering and crying, and it's just like that their inhibitions are gone. They feel like a child again. They feel just happy. That is like fulfillment for them. That's what it is for people who are labeled as Disney adults as well. I went one time on a business trip and I was by myself. And so I'm like, I'm walking through the parks trying to very quietly like video the parks so the boys could watch. And I'm like tearing up because like I'm having it was such a weird like mix of emotions. I'm having such a great time because I'm in Disney. Also, like, I wish my family could be there. I wish like my wife and the boys could enjoy all of that and experience that. And then like, there's the guilt also. Like, yeah, I like they're in school right now. I'm here. I'm working. Don't worry. Like, you start justifying things to yourself. But like when I was on that trip, I went and I made a point to watch the like the opening ceremony or whatever in front of the castle. Like, I was standing at the castle, and yes, I was like at the rope. Like, I was the first person to walk through when they dropped the rope. And I'm watching this. I'd never watched it before, and I'm just crying, looking at all these characters, and like fairy godmother coming out and saying like, we hope you have a great day. And then because it makes me start thinking, there are people out of the 30,000 people around me, probably 15,000 people have been to a Disney park before. But there are also those people who have never done this, and this is the time that they get to experience it, and they're going all out. And I just got finished talking to people who um, said, as former cast members, some of the interactions they had just seeing the excitement on people's faces was just so, well, I'll say magical, um, but so emotional as well. That's what people don't understand. When people want to say, like, oh, somebody's a Disney adult, and they're meaning it like, well, they need to grow up. Well, instead of asking that person, like, oh, well, or instead of saying, well, you just don't, or like, you're a fan of something, and I think that's crazy also, like, instead of like kind of bouncing off and trying to like bounce off with negativity, if you ask that person, well, what is it that makes you feel whole, or what is it that makes you cry tears of joy? That's like, people would probably start with family, friends, things like that, but eventually they're going to get to, it's when I listen to music, it's when I go to live theater, it's when I go to a concert, whatever it is. And then hopefully that kind of builds that understanding. I have never felt like um, the term Disney adult is negative. I know it's used in negative ways. Um, I generally, I don't look at myself in a negative way. So that would make sense. If I don't look at myself in a negative way, if I look at the label in a negative way, well, there's that conflict I was talking about. But, one thing that I feel that feels really, really good to me is the number of people who have started to take that term, take that label, and turn it into something positive. And we've seen that in many instances where people will take, here's a term somebody or label somebody wants to use in a negative way. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's me. Like, I love it. You know, uh, People, hey, you're a comics fan, you need to grow up. Uh, okay, I did grow up, but I still love comics. I still love going to Disney parks. I love all of this stuff. So it feels really good to me to see people kind of turning it into something that's positive also.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like that we can kind of reclaim it as our own, and see it as a good thing, as a positive. And I think you've shared a lot of things that we can be excited about and positive about with our Disney fandom today. So, Cody, thanks so much for keeping me company on the show today. And I do
Yeah,
have to
thank
give a
you.
quick, I do have to give a quick plug for your show since I was just a guest on it, and that's the Being a Fan of Disney podcast. But you have so much other cool stuff going on with being a fan of Disney. So where can we find you online to catch up with all that stuff?
You can follow the public group on Facebook, being a fan of Disney. People can find me on Facebook as well, just Cody Havard. But like on Threads and Instagram now, it's so great. Everything's like, now those two things are kind of linked. It's Cody
Yeah.
Havard, CODY.HAVARD. Um, and I post things about Disney there. I post just general stories. I post things about the class there. If you want more information about the class, sharedperspectives.org is the website where that kind of links to work I've done in sport, with a website that was called sportrivalry.com. Now it's just LinkedIn, part of sharedperspectives.org. But there's also like you can access the book there. The share Being a Fan of Disney, the podcast is available wherever you get your podcast. Being a Fan of Disney, the book, available on Amazon. It's Kindle, hardback, paperback. I did an Audible version of it, which is so fun.
That's
It's
cool. Yeah.
hard, but it's really, really cool. Um, and then, some other, if you go to sharedperspectives.org, you can see some other projects I'm working on. I'm trying to write like for young readers and teenagers now about some of the research that I've done and how it can impact people. So, yeah, look me up on uh, social media, go to the website, follow the show. And you could search me on YouTube as well. There's a channel for Being a Fan of Disney also.
So yeah, there's so many great ways to find all of Cody's work for sure. And I know I've been exploring it since being on his show and having him on this show. So then yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And so I want to know what you feel about our Disney fandom, our community. So let me know on, you could leave comments on YouTube, or you could find me on Instagram and Threads at Synergy Loves Company. And because our fandom is a community, could you share the show with a friend of yours who would enjoy Synergy Loves Company? Tell them about this episode, maybe another one that's your favorite. Send them a link on social media. Heck, you could tag me in it and I'll say hi. Or you could just tell them to visit synergylovescompany.com. And remember, this show is listener supported. There's no sponsors. It's just you and me. So if you feel like you're getting something out of the podcast and you want to show your appreciation, you can support the show on Ko-fi. There you can donate any amount you'd like, and it helps me keep producing the show. But no matter how you decide to support the show, I really appreciate the time you spend with me. So thank you. And thanks for exploring Disney's connections with me. And until next time, keep discovering the magic in everything.